prayer in schools to establishing the legality of abortion, the rulings of the Supreme Court bear little resemblance to its own history or to the intent of our founding fathers. What is the purpose of our nation's judicial branch? And according to the Constitution, how much authority does it hold over our nation and the other branches of government? Discover the forgotten and astonishing story of our nation's foundation in the American Heritage series. For centuries, Americans were taught a truthful view of history that recognized the godly heroes and moral foundation our nation was founded upon. But in recent years, a new version of history has assaulted the moral and spiritual fiber of our nation, leaving the truth of our past eliminated and forgotten until today. Join historian David Barton and experience the untold story of our nation's history in the American Heritage series.
The Founding Fathers said the judiciary is the weakest, is to be controlled by the other two. They said that judges do not have lifetime appointments. They specifically said we do not have 3 independent branches.
The legal interpretations of the Supreme Court have become the final determiner in the policies that affect the daily lives of American citizens.
Since when did we allow the opinion of the majority of 9 individuals to become the equal of law?
Are all branches of the government created equal?
There was no branch that was unaccountable to the people. That's why the Constitution up top says, "We the people."
Does the Supreme Court now wield more power than our founding fathers ever intended? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
In America, we've had a Constitution for more than 2 centuries. We still operate under that Constitution. We still have our 3 branches of government that are assigned by that Constitution. And if the Founding Fathers were to come back today to see what it looked like 2 centuries later, what we did, what does it look like now? They would recognize the presidency. They would recognize the congressional side. They would scratch their head at the judiciary and say, who are these guys? Where do they come from? Where do they get these powers you're talking about? They would be absolutely floored to see what we have done with the judiciary today, or really allowed the judiciary to do, when they gave us such explicit writings back in the beginning that were exactly on the other side.
Wow.
There's at least 5 judicial myths that we widely buy today that they would say, well, wait a minute, we wrote this all down so you would know better.
Explain in kind of layman's terms the judiciary. What does that encompass? Who are these people? Where do they come from? What do they do?
You have judiciary that occurs actually at 2 levels. You have the federal judiciary, you have a state judiciary. At the federal judiciary, all judges are appointed by the President, confirmed by the U.S. Senate. At the state judiciary, some states have judges appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. More than half the states elect the judges that serve in the judiciary. You have levels of judiciary. You will have the Supreme Court, you'll have the Court of Appeals, and you'll have a district court. And that exists in both the state side and the federal side. So you have a bunch of lower level judges. What they do can be appealed to the Court of Appeals level. Much fewer there, maybe 8 to 10% of the number. And then from there, that can get appealed to the Supreme Court, either the state or the United States. So that's generally the structure of judiciary. And it's gotten to be now where that we use the judiciary as a policy-making body. If we don't like what the state legislature did, we'll go, it's called forum shopping. We'll go find a judge that we know doesn't like what they did, and we'll file a suit in his court so he'll strike it down. And so now it's gotten to where legal groups use the judges as an alternative legislature. If 90% of the people want something, the legislature passes it, and the 10% couldn't win in the legislature, they'll go try to win at the courts. So to say that that's the only source of justice, and that's a self-policing body, that's not good, that's not right, and it is not what the Constitution authorized. And that's where we get these 5 judicial myths. Interestingly, the locations in which the Supreme Court met during its first century and a half form a potent commentary on the founders' views of the power and the reach of the Supreme Court. Our founders made remarkably elaborate plans for the city of Washington, D.C. Our founders planned for traffic, they anticipated growth, they made far-sighted preparations for the President and the Congress, and they provided buildings and support services for both. Yet with all of their elaborate preparations, they did not provide a separate building for the U.S. Supreme Court. And this was not an oversight on their part. It was intentional. The Supreme Court met inside the Capitol. In the first 10 years in this building, the court bounced around from location to location, from various committee rooms to library rooms to whatever was available. Then in 1810, when the Senate left its original chambers and moved directly upstairs to its newer and larger second location, the Supreme Court inherited these vacated Senate chambers. It was here, in the basement of the U.S. Senate, that the Supreme Court finally found its first permanent home, a location it kept for the next 50 years. Then, when the Senate vacated the old Senate chambers and moved into its current home, the Supreme Court moved upstairs to possess the again vacated Senate chambers. It was by design that the Supreme Court had no major role in shaping policy in the nation. Simply look at the Constitution for proof. Article 1 deals with the powers of the Congress, Article 2 with the powers of the President, and Article 3 with the powers of the Supreme Court. Article 1 is by far the longest of those three articles, and Article 3 is unquestionably the shortest. For the first 10 years of its existence, the entire Supreme Court term lasted less than 2 weeks out of each year. And for the next 50 years, the court still only met for 6 to 8 weeks a year. It was not until 1935, nearly a century and a half after the founders had written the Constitution, that a separate building was built behind the Capitol to house the Supreme Court, the home it now occupies. And it was not until 2 decades after this, in 1956, that under the guidance of its activist Chief Justice, Earl Warren, the Supreme Court first began to meet for nearly 9 months out of each year, a practice which still continues today. First off, we're told the three branches are co-equal. Founding Fathers said absolutely not. You have to remember that the Founding Fathers did the Constitution 11 years after they did the Declaration. The Declaration set forth their reasons for separating from Great Britain. So in their reasons, when they say, for example, we don't want taxation without representation, they come over here 11 years later and they say now in the legislature, you cannot create any tax that does not go through the legislature. And by the way, it can't come out of the Senate, it has to come out of the House of Representatives, because that's the body closest to the people.
Correct.
So everything they raised in the Declaration, they solved in the Constitution. In the Declaration, they raised 4 clauses that dealt with judicial abuses. They said, we're having real trouble with British judges. We have judicial activism with these British judges. 11 years later, they solved it in the Constitution. Now, the 2 things that they complained the most about with British judges, and this started with Sam Adams in 1765. Samuel Adams was one of the leaders in this. He said, 2 problems with the British judiciary. One is their judges have lifetime appointments. 2, their judges are unaccountable to the people. What we have is King George III appoints them, and they make rulings against our legislatures all the time, and we can't do anything about it because they're appointed by the king, not by us. We got no recourse. On top of that, he pays their salary. We don't.
Wow.
We don't have any way of touching these judges. So the 2 big complaints Americans had about the British judicial system was lifetime appointments and unaccountable judges. And so you're going to tell me that that being the 2 biggest complaints, they gave us the Constitution that's going to allow lifetime appointments and going to allow unaccountable judges? No. When they got to the Constitution, they gave us 6 clauses that enabled Congress to keep judges from having lifetime appointments, 6 clauses that enabled Congress to keep judges from being unaccountable. I mean, there's all sorts of tools they gave to make sure we wouldn't have what we'd experienced with Great Britain. Well, we're right back now where we were 200 years ago with Great Britain. We've got lifetime appointments, unaccountable judges. And it's not because they didn't try, because they were prolific writers. And it's not because they didn't put it in the Constitution, it's because we don't study that document anymore.
Wow.
We read about it in school, but we don't read it.
Right.
You know, we'll read somebody say, oh, the Constitution provides 3 co-equal branches. Well, let's read the Constitution and see if it does.
Right.
See, what we do is we take somebody's summary of it and we don't read it. So, the federal Constitution says that judges do not hold lifetime appointments. Article 3, Section 1 says they're appointed for the duration of good behavior. That's different. That means as long as you act right, you can stay on the court. If you act wrong, you're gone. There was no branch that was unaccountable to the people. That's why the Constitution up top says, we the people. We're in charge of all 3 branches. We don't have the divine right of judges like they had the divine right of kings. We do today. I mean, whatever the judge says. I was on a debate recently with a very high-ranking national media individual who's over a large media conglomerate. He says, well, if you guys don't like this decision of the U.S. Supreme Court, just go pass the constitutional amendment. And I said, no, wait a minute. If I have to change the Constitution to change the Supreme Court decision, you're telling me that their decision is the equivalent of the U.S. Constitution. Because if I have to change the Constitution to change their decision, then you're saying their decision is the Constitution.
Right.
See, people buy that.
Right.
People look at it. No, Founding Fathers gave us a lot of ways to change judicial decisions without having to amend the Constitution. We need to go back and read what Founding Fathers said about judges. Founding Fathers said they are not three co-equal branches. They said judiciary is the weakest, is to be controlled by the other two. They said that judges do not have lifetime appointments. They specifically said we do not have three independent branches. None of the branches are independent. All the branches account to the people.
The legal interpretations of the Supreme Court have become the final determiner in the policies that affect the daily lives of American citizens. Are all branches of the government created equal? Or does the Supreme Court now wield more power than our Founding Fathers ever intended? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
The third Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was Oliver Ellsworth. He was a member of the Continental Congress during the American Revolution and was also a member of the convention that framed the Constitution. Like the other Founding Fathers, he too held strong convictions about religion and public life. Here, for example, is a piece written in the Connecticut Courant of June the 7th, 1802.
The primary objects of government are the peace, order, and prosperity of society. To the promotion of these objects, particularly in a republican government, good morals are essential. Institutions for the promotion of good morals are, therefore, objects of legislative provision and support. And among these, religious institutions are eminently useful and important. The legislature, charged with the great interests of the community, may and ought to countenance, aid, and protect religious institutions. Institutions wisely calculated to direct men to the performance of all the duties arising from their connection with each other, and to prevent or repress those evils which flow from unrestrained passion. The legislature may aid the maintenance of Christianity, whose benign influence on morals is universally acknowledged. It may be added that this principle has long been recognized and is too intimately connected with the peace, order, and happiness of the state to be abandoned.
This is a bust of Oliver Ellsworth, third Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, who declared that it is appropriate and proper for the state to aid and encourage religion. One of the things that we hear today, and the court says it's very regular, this says the purpose of the Supreme Court is to protect the minority from the majority. We hear that, minority rights. I don't know of anyone in America that wants to trample on minority rights. Oh, there's a minority religiously or racially or anything else, I'm going to go trample on those rights. People do that, but that's by and large the extreme. That's not the average. The best protector of minority rights is the majority. You see, we ended slavery in America not because the court did anything, the court tried to keep it going, but because the majority said this is wrong. So we passed the 13th Amendment. And by the way, it was a supermajority. It was 2/3 of Congress and it was 3/4 of the states that said we want to end slavery.
More blood.
That's right.
In that Civil War.
But see, the courts weren't good protectors of the right of women to vote. The people said we want women voting. Who did that? Males. Males were the only ones that could vote. Males themselves said we think women should vote, so we're tying our own hands so women get the right to vote. How is it that 18-year-olds got the right to vote? Because there's always 21. Because we, the people, passed an amendment to the Constitution that said, you know what? We think that if you're old enough to go out and die for your country, you're old enough to vote. And so we, over the age of 21, are going to give that same right to kids that are 18 and older. If you look at the issue of poll taxes, the Supreme Court was not good on civil rights, but the people were. The people consistently defend minority rights better than the courts do. And the founders understood that. And that's because we, the people, know what we feel. We elect representatives that know what we feel. Therefore, when we put them in office, they can protect what we think is important. Now, you got guys in the court who get appointed for 30 or 40 years. They don't even talk to average people. They run in completely different circles. Wow. And we're saying that 5 of them can tell us what we think and believe and feel and can protect our rights. This whole notion of minority right protection, what the court has done with that. And by the way, I have to back up to say that we had 2 political parties at the time of the founding of America, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. And if you think that our 2 major political parties today are pretty pointed toward each other, it's wimpy compared to what they did back in the founding era. I mean, these guys were vicious back there.
Right.
But what you'll find is the leader of the Federalists and the leader of the Anti-Federalists both made identical statements. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, two political parties, they both said the fundamental principle of the Constitution requires that the will of the majority shall prevail. Now, that's the purpose of the Constitution, is to make sure that the will of the people is what goes into policy. You don't ever have a policy in America that's enacted because 10% wanted it, 90% didn't, but we're going to have the 10% win. That's just not constitutional until the court comes along. And it says, oh no, it's our purpose to protect the minority from the majority. If 90% of you want that, that's not fair for the 10%. So we're going to say all 90% are wrong, we're going to do it this way. That is a complete reversal of everything the Constitution was designed to do. Another Supreme Court justice who adds to the rich spiritual heritage of this courtroom is Joseph Story. Joseph Story was truly a son of the American Revolution. His father had been one of the so-called Indians who conducted the Boston Tea Party, and Joseph Story became a U.S. congressman under President Thomas Jefferson, and then President James Madison appointed him to the Supreme Court to replace the retiring William Cushing, one of the court's original 6 justices. Joseph Story, at age 32, was the youngest justice ever appointed to the court. Joseph Story became committed to the principles of Christianity. Throughout his lengthy legal career, he consistently expressed his strong convictions about the importance of Christianity to civil government. Joseph Story did not believe that American law or legal practices could be or should be separated from Christian principles. As he explained,
one of the beautiful boasts of our municipal jurisprudence is that Christianity is a part of the common law. There never has been a period in which the common law did not recognize Christianity as lying at its foundations. The law pronounces illegal every contract offensive to Christianity's morals. The law recognizes with profound humility Christianity's holidays and festivals and obeys them even to the point of suspending all government functions on those days. And the law still attaches to persons believing in Christianity's divine authority the highest degree of competency as witnesses.
one of Justice Story's most famous legal writings was his 1833 commentaries on the Constitution of the United States. Notice what this distinguished Supreme Court justice said about Christianity and the Constitution, including the fact that the First Amendment was never intended to separate Christianity from civil government or from civil society.
The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, we are not to attribute this prohibition of a national religious establishment to an indifference to religion in general, and especially to Christianity, which none could hold in more reverence than the framers of the Constitution. Indeed, the right of a society or government to participate in matters of religion will hardly be contested by any persons who believe that piety, religion, and morality are intimately connected with the well-being of the state and indispensable to the administrations of civil justice. At the time of the adoption of the Constitution and of the First Amendment to it, the general, if not the universal, sentiment in America was that Christianity ought to receive encouragement from the state. An attempt to level all religions and make it a matter of state policy to hold all in utter indifference would have created universal disapprobation, if not universal indignation.
Joseph Story believed that it was improper to exclude Christianity from the government sphere or from the public arena. In fact, he felt that it was so improper that he declared that he would not support anyone who even attempted to undermine or remove Christianity's influence from society. He declared,
I verily believe Christianity necessary to the support of civil society, and shall ever attend to its institutions and acknowledge its precepts as the pure and natural sources of private and social happiness. The man who could subvert its influence will never receive support from me.
strong sentiments from Justice Story, who sat in this courtroom and who today is still called a father of American jurisprudence.
The legal interpretations of the Supreme Court have become the final determiner in the policies that affect the daily lives of American citizens. Are all branches of the government created equal? Or does the Supreme Court now wield more power than our founding fathers ever intended? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
Basically, the most out-of-touch branch with the average person is the judiciary.
Yes.
At some point, they started, or let's put it this way, we as the average citizen started listening to the judiciary as the highest power. And you know, in my mind, honestly, the Supreme Court says something, that's it. You know, that is law, and there is no higher voice in the land. But what you're saying is really the Founding Fathers were wanting to separate those powers. They were wanting to put the judiciary in its place. And we have believed over the many years 5 myths in regard to their power, and we just buy it.
Let me pick up something you said. You have come to believe that when the court says something, that's just the way it is. That's law.
Right.
Do you know what the title is on every single Supreme Court decision, and has been since back in 1789?
No, sir.
The first line says, the opinion of the court. It doesn't say the law of the court. It's the court's opinion. Now, since when did we allow the opinion of the majority of 9 individuals to become the equal of law? And this is one of the most intriguing things. If you take a tour into the U.S. Supreme Court right now, as you go on the tour, they will stand in there. The tour guide will tell you, this is the building from which all the law in the land emanates. You go, wait a minute, time out. What's that big dome building across the street where they make laws?
Wow.
And they said, no, all law comes out of this. On the court decision, it says the opinion of the court. The significance of that is the Founding Fathers told us in the Federalist Papers that all 3 branches are capable of determining constitutionality.
Oh, my goodness.
The President reads it, he takes an oath to uphold it. Congress reads it, they take an oath to uphold it. Courts read it, they take an oath to uphold it. Well, what if their opinion of constitutionality is different from the President's or from the Congress's? Does that mean that these 2 have to bow down to what they say?
Oh, my goodness.
That's why it's only their opinion. Now, what would happen? Congress would pass a law, the court would say, our opinion, this is unconstitutional. Congress would say, we hadn't thought about it from that standpoint. That's a good point. We'll go back and change the law. Well, it's their opinion. But on the other side, you had people like Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, and you had Thomas Jefferson, and you had James Madison, who said, that's your opinion, and it's dead wrong. Under the Constitution, for example, Abraham Lincoln, under the Constitution, there's nothing that says blacks are property. That's your opinion. I'm not following it. I'm declaring slavery to be ended in Washington, D.C., and I'm even going to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, both of which were direct pokes in the eye at the U.S. Supreme Court, who told him he couldn't do that. But he's just as capable of determining constitutionality as they are. That's why it's the opinion of the court. One notable case occurred in 1841 and dealt with the Spanish slave trading ship La Amistad. The case proceeded through the legal system, and an elderly John Quincy Adams was called in to argue this case before this Supreme Court. In what became his last words ever spoken before the Supreme Court, Adams stood in this very room, reminisced about the changes he had seen during his long life, and then closed by offering his heart's prayer for each justice then sitting on the bench. He told the court,
"May it please your honors, on the 7th of February, 1804, now more than 37 years past, my name was entered and yet stands recorded as one of the attorneys and counselors of this court. 5 years later, I appeared for the last time before this court, for shortly afterwards, I was called to the discharge of other duties, first in distant lands and in later years within our country, but in different departments of her government. Little did I imagine that I should ever again be required to claim the right of appearing in the capacity of an officer of this court. Yet, such has been the dictate of my destiny. I stand before the same court, but not before the same judges. As I cast my eyes along those seats of honor and of public trust now occupied by you, they seek in vain for one of those honored and honorable persons whose indulgence listened then to my voice. Marshall, Cushing, Chase, Washington, Johnson, Livingston, Todd. Where are they? Where are they all? Gone. Gone. All gone. I humbly hope and fondly trust that they have gone to receive the rewards of blessedness on high. In taking, then, my final leave of this honorable court, I can only offer a fervent prayer to heaven that every member of this court may go to his final account with the approving sentence, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord."
If there is a federal court that says if you pray at a school, we will come and lock you up, they have power to send a federal marshal.
They don't. See, all they can do is render the decision. The executive branch executes the power. All federal marshals are under control of the president, not under control of the courts. So this is something Congress has started doing in recent years. The courts say, we order you to get that 10 Commandments out of the courthouse. Congress quickly comes in and says, not a single penny can be appropriated to move those 10 Commandments out of the courthouse. Well, if you can't appropriate money, then the marshals can't go in to do anything because they get paid by the federal government. They get paid through the executive branch. So what's happened is there's a lot of ways to... See, federal marshals don't work for federal judges. They work for the president. They're appointed by the president. They answer to the president. They're under the Justice Department, one of the executive branches under the president, so they can issue opinions all day long. This is why when Andrew Jackson was president, John Marshall issued an opinion on a certain subject. Andrew Jackson said, "That's your opinion. Let's see if you can enforce it." That was his response. Because the courts have no power to enforce opinions. The other two branches do that.
You know what you've just done for me? You've just changed my opinion about the judiciary, and this is how. They have no authority. So only what I believe about their opinion is what governs
Only
me.
What we allow them to have is, if we will simply go back to the documents, go back and read our history to see how those who wrote the documents applied it, it's a no-brainer. America is fine, but it starts up here. Until we change what we know, we don't change what we allow them to do.
For more information on the American Heritage Series, or to find books and other resources, visit wallbuilders.com. Through the American Heritage Series, renowned historian David Barton communicates our nation's forgotten, godly foundations and encourages us to once again view history through a truthful lens. For only when we recognize and embrace God's hand in our history can America become all that it was intended to be. Through Wall Builders, historian David Barton seeks to rebuild the walls of America's unique religious, moral, and constitutional heritage by educating the public and encouraging people of faith to become active in strengthening America's great foundations. For more information on how you can become involved, visit wallbuilders.com.